Some JRPGs just age like fine wine, but others not so much. Buried beneath outdated graphics, clunky mechanics, and non-stop random encounters are absolute masterpieces just begging for a second chance. Today we're diving into 10 JRPGs that desperately need a remake, games that are going to have incredible stories, legendary soundtracks, and iconic characters that really deserve a chance to shine on modern hardware. And trust me, one of these picks is going to be a cult classic that you probably forgot that you loved. So which gems made the cut? Let's go ahead and get into the first one and find out. If you grew up in the 90s and were into JRPGs at that time, chances are you've heard of Breath of Fire. Now, if you haven't, this was Capcom's fantasy JRPG series that never really reached the mainstream heights of Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest, but for a certain group of fans, this was just like a hidden masterpiece and an underrated gem for them. And honestly, looking back now, this franchise is really long overdue for a proper remake. Now let's go ahead and start with the central premise that really made this game click for a lot of people. And it's just really cool that you're able to play as a member of the Dragon Clan. That's usually going to be a guy named Ryu who can transform into dragons during battle. And that mechanic alone gave the game a really distinct identity amongst other JRPGs. Each game had its own really unique vibe, so Breath of Fire 1 and 2 were charming, but a bit rough around the edges, so think more straightforward storytelling with great world building, but it is bogged down by some dated mechanics and tons of grinding, which is why it's primed for a remake. But 3 and 4 are where some people believe the game peaked, whether that be mechanically or artistically. They brought in better sprite work, more complex characters, and more darker and introspective storytelling, and that's what 3 and 4. And then after that, you have Dragon Quarter or 5, which was different, and it really ditched in favor of ditched everything that they kind of built up with the franchise in favor of a more experimental roguelike structure. Some people loved it, some people hated it, but no one can say that they played it safe when they were developing this. They really experimented, and that could be what happened to the franchise and why it kind of got dropped. But if that's not the case, what happened? Why hasn't Capcom touched Breath of Fire in 20 years? Maybe not a sequel, just not touched it at all with any types of remake, aside from a mobile-only Breath of Fire 6 that no one really asked for or wanted to play. And honestly, your guess is as good as mine. I feel like there's an entire generation of JRPG fans who have never played Breath of Fire because this franchise has been sitting idle for 20 years. Recently though, Capcom did a poll looking for customer opinions, and Breath of Fire ranked extremely high for a series that hasn't been touched. Hopefully that's good news. But what's painfully clear is that Breath of Fire is the kind of series that's perfectly positioned for a modern remake or just a remaster. And Capcom has something special in the vault with Breath of Fire, and it's just sitting there gathering dust. And so if there's ever been a time to revisit it, whether it be a full remake, an HD 2D, or reimagine, or even a spiritual successor, I feel like now is the time. And based on the polling that they've been doing, I wouldn't be surprised if we see something soon. They recently brought Breath of Fire to GOG, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of like a little teaser to see how much interest there is in the franchise, and maybe we'll get some more going forward. Skies of Arcadia is one of the most criminally overlooked JRPGs of all time, and we're going to get into why that is a little bit later. But if you haven't played it and you know someone who did, this is one of those games that people love and never shut up about, but for a good reason. This was originally released on the Dreamcast and then re-released on GameCube a few years later with some tweaks, but Skies of Arcadia is just one of those absolute gems of a game that's screaming for a modern remake, and right now the only way to play it is on those two consoles or an emulator, which is why a port would be so welcomed, and I feel like it would introduce it to a lot more fans. And I feel like this also plays into why it's being overlooked, is because it's been trapped on these two older consoles with no really easy way to access it for new JRPG fans who want to revisit and give it a chance. Now, for those who haven't played it already, imagine a JRPG that swaps out the end of the world doom and gloom for a world made up of floating islands, sky pirates, and airships. That's going to be Skies of Arcadia. You're going to play as Vice and his childhood friend and a mysterious girl, and together they're going to travel the skies, collect magical moonstones, and battle evil pirates, because why not? You're going to have sky pirates, you're going to have airships, there's going to be pirates. It just makes sense. But you're also going to be discovering ancient civilizations. Where other JRPGs kind of focus on gloomy and the dramatics, Skies of Arcadia really just focuses on being joyful. And I feel like that's a big part of the charm. The world of Arcadia is one of the most imaginative settings in a JRPG ever made, and it still holds up. A remake could expand on that world in the way that the Dreamcast and the GameCube simply couldn't handle, and I feel like a full remake in Unreal Engine or even a stylized art style like Ni no Kuni would absolutely bring this universe to life. The turn-based battle system was solid for its time, but I feel like the airspace battleships, the unique feature, is what would really shine in a modern day remake. You could give them dynamic camera angles, maybe more strategic systems and smoother pacing, and boom, you've got something that feels distinct from the crowd of other JRPGs that's going to make Skies of Arcadia shine even more, and that's what it did back in the day, and I feel like it's still primed to do that with the modern remake. And then you toss in some quality of life improvements, like faster animations and fewer random encounters, and boom, you're golden. People are gonna love this game. Like, no joke, every time Sega announces anything RPG related, if you look in the comments, you'll find Skies of Arcadia's fans in there just screaming, hey, when we gonna get the remake? Give it to us, remake win. So this isn't some obscure cult hit that no one cares about. This is a beloved classic that's stuck in limbo for 2 decades, and Sega has the IP, the audience is there, so I feel like the time is now, even if that's just making it more accessible on modern consoles. If you haven't already, I really would appreciate it if you help me get this video to 100 likes, and subscribe if you want more JRPG content like this. But now let's go ahead and move into the next game on the list. Blue Dragon is one of those things that had all the right pieces to become a JRPG legend, and somehow it never got the follow through that it deserved. Now, if you paid attention to JRPGs in the Xbox 360 era, this one's definitely gonna ring a bell, because Blue Dragon was Microsoft's big push to win over JRPG fans. And honestly, it had a ton going for it. There were so many legendary names attached to this project. We had Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, and Akira Toriyama. So with all this, I didn't even get into the composer, like, it was just insane. And with all that talent behind it, Blue Dragon really had serious potential. And while it did do some things right, it kind of just came and went, which is exactly why now, more than 2 decades later, is the perfect time for a remake. Now in Blue Dragon, you'll play as Shu, who gains the power to summon a shadow creature, and his, like the title, just happens to be a blue dragon. And as the story unfolds, Shu and his friends, each with their own shadow monsters, take on an evil ruler to attempt to reshape the world. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind as to why this game kind of came and went is because Blue Dragon was an Xbox 360 exclusive. Now, keep in mind that Xbox really wasn't a big hit in Japan, and it still really isn't. So a JRPG fan made by Japanese legends, launched as an exclusive on a console that almost no one in Japan owned at the time, was just like a recipe for disaster. So even though it had a decent Western fan base, a remake making it accessible on all consoles would really give Blue Dragon a chance at success that it never really got. Now, Akira Toriyama's art style is timeless, but the original visuals haven't really aged that well. A remake, boom, easy fix for that. Give it maybe some stylized cel-shaded looks, smooth out the battle animations, and bring the environment to life with lighting and detail just a tidbit more, and suddenly you're gonna have a JRPG that can go toe-to-toe with today's best looking titles. The roots are already there with all of these legends that worked on it in the past. It just needs maybe a little bit of modern sprucing up. Now, when it comes to combat, the game has turn-based battles with characters' shadows that could change classes and learn abilities. It never felt as quite deep and rewarding as it should have been, but with the remake, you could really lean into that system and expand on it and doing things like adding more classes and maybe speeding up battle flow. Now, I feel like Blue Dragon really had the right vision, the right people involved, and some really great ideas, but it was one of those things that was a product of its time and on the wrong platform, and maybe just a little bit too ambitious for Microsoft's first attempt into this realm. But if you remove the console exclusivity, I really think that a Blue Dragon port or remake would go absolutely crazy. You know the feeling when a game tries to do too much. It has big ideas, crazy plot twists, philosophy tossed in, ancient gods, space operas, and somehow still makes it all work? That's essentially what Xenosaga is, or at least what it wanted to be. Now, in the PS2 era, Xenosaga was one of those games that either completely pulled you in or entirely flew over your head. But whether you loved it or you bounced off and you were like, I'm cool on this, there's no denying that it aimed for something really big and really ambitious. The trilogy follows a scientist working on a sentient android weapon, Cosmos. Now, the Xenosaga story is extremely dense. A cutscene could feel more like watching an anime episode than playing a game. And don't get me wrong, the writing and characters are solid, but most people would say that the pacing even back then needed some help. A modern remake really could trim the fat, reanimate the scenes to give it a better direction, facial animations and emotions, and keep the impactful moments, but make the storytelling way more snappier. Cosmos with deeper AI versus humanity themes in today's day and age, oh my god, that would hit even harder than it did in its initial release. Each game in the trilogy has a different battle system with varying degrees of polish on it. Episode 1 had slow turn-based combat that felt a bit clunky. Episode 2 had some interesting combo mechanics but weird, abrupt difficulty spikes. And then episode 3, people feel like finally got the formula right, but by then most players were already tapped out, and so a full trilogy remake could unify the combat to be more similar to episode 3 into a single smooth system across all 3 entries. Now, Xenosaga was one of those series that was flawed for sure, but it never was boring. It was extremely ambitious with its storytelling and aimed very high, and it didn't always land, but it did leave a huge impression on those who were able to stick with it, and it didn't fly over their head with all of the deep storytelling that they attempted to do. Now, Xenosaga was originally planned to be 6 games, but once the sales numbers were missed, they were forced to wrap things up in a trilogy. I feel like a remake could really build onto the narrative with a clearer roadmap, and maybe even still keep it 3 parts, but make it way more cohesive with its storytelling and world building. And if maybe that's a hit, it could even allow the developers to revisit the content that was originally cut. The Legend of Dragoon is Sony's cult classic PS1 JRPG that still lives rent-free in the minds of all the JRPG fans out there that gave it a try. Now, we saw with Blue Dragon earlier, Microsoft had their attempt at the JRPG genre, and this was Sony's attempt to make their own Final Fantasy VII. Now, in The Legend of Dragoon, you're going to play as Dart as he sets free on a journey of revenge and redemption. Along the way, you're going to discover the legacy of the Dragoons, who were warriors bonded with dragon spirits. Now, what The Legends of Dragoon did very well is build a world where every party member felt like they mattered and had impact. And that went across all party members, whether it be Rose, Meru, each character had something to say, and the game gave them the time to say it. The game had dragons, transformation sequences, and the entire battle system around time-based inputs called additions. Instead of selecting an attack and watching it played out, we've seen this with Expedition 33, Lost Odyssey, a lot of games, Mario the RPG, but you're going to be required to time button presses mid-animations to complete the combos. And if you messed up the input, you'd lose a chunk of damage, so it's not the most forgiving system, but it was very satisfying when you got it right. A little bit later in the game, you're also able to unlock the Dragoon forms, and that added an extra bit of flashiness to battles, but the abilities weren't as impactful as you'd expect them to be. But they did look cool, but I feel like if there was a modern remake of The Legends of Dragoon, the transformation system is something they definitely could elaborate on and make it more strategic and dive more into it to make it more impactful. Maybe something like the limit break system or tactical shifts that change really how you approach a fight. Maybe something like Persona 5 Royal's Baton Pass system mixed with Final Fantasy X's overdrives. Wild Arms is one of the more quiet, low-key influential JRPGs, and it came out just a few months before Final Fantasy VII exploded onto the scene, and I feel like because of that unfortunate timing, Wild Arms really slipped under the radar for a lot of people. But those who did play it, they'll tell you this game really has a heart, style, and a setting that's very unique to the world of JRPGs that makes it stand out amongst the others at its time. The Wild Arms series combines elements of American Wild West with traditional JRPG fantasy elements, really creating a world that's one of one and it has never been replicated since. The fusion's gonna include deserts, cowboys, outlaws, and you're gonna mix that with magic, ancient technologies, and mythical creatures. I feel like the Yellowstone collab would already go nuts. In my mind, I see the modern remake with the Yellowstone collab. Oh man, Wild Arms is gonna go crazy if they can get the rights to do that. But the soundtrack sounds about how you expect, but it really complements the game well. While Wild Arms is a franchise, the Wild Arms games usually aren't direct sequels of each other, but they are set in the same world and share similar common terminology, and each game in the series introduces new gameplay mechanics while attempting to still retain its core elements that define the series. For many fans, Wild Arms really evokes that nostalgia, and all they need to do is take the pixel art enhance it with modern visuals like the HD 2D remakes we keep seeing pop up, maybe toss in some anime style cutscenes, boom, you got a money printing right now. But a spiritual successor named the Arm Fantasian has been kickstarted and funded, so it's not a remake, but there is still some life surrounding the franchise, and from what they've shown us so far, it looks like they are not just going the HD 2D remake route, they're giving us a full 3D spiritual successor, and if they're actually able to finish the game, it looks very good so far. Xenogears is often hailed as one of the greatest JRPGs of all time, and whether that be due to childhood nostalgia or the cinematography is up for debate, it's usually Xenogears or Chrono Trigger when you ask a veteran JRPG fan. And so, I wouldn't be surprised though if this was one of the most requested games for a remake on this list. Now, what really sets Xenogears apart is its story, characters, and tackling identity, free will, and existence. Xenogears is set in a world where ancient powerful mechs known as gears are going to be a significant part of both the culture and its warfare. The story follows Faye after his village is attacked by giant robots called gears, and Faye accidentally activates one of those gears to defend his village, but instead does the exact opposite, causing a lot of damage to the village. And Faye decides to leave the village in guilt and confusion to really uncover the truths about his past. Xenogears has turn-based combat on foot and in gears, and the gears are going to be mech battles, which really add a unique twist through its fuel-based mechanics. Xenogears is one of those JRPGs that I feel like is a must-play in today's day and age, whether that be with or without a remake, but hopefully we can get a remake slated or something announced to bring a little bit of life back into this and maybe update the visuals to make it more palatable when you're playing this game for, 50 plus hours, because it is a pretty long game. All right, let's talk about Phantasy Star. Not Phantasy Star Online, not Phantasy Star Universe, but the original Phantasy Star games. If you haven't even dipped your toes in this series yet, have no worries, you are not alone. I feel like despite being one of the earliest JRPGs on consoles, these games really just slipped into obscurity. Before Mass Effect, before Xenoblade, Phantasy Star was the OG game mixing swords and sorcery with space travel and androids. As much as people like these games though, there's no sugarcoating it, these games really show their age. We're talking about random encounters each step you take, no quality of life features, and first-person dungeons that feel like you're just navigating through a maze blindfolded. It can be abysmal at times. And then on top of that, you have the story that's being delivered just through a wall of text, stiff animations, and zero voice acting. I feel like the honest to God sad truth is that Phantasy Star is a narrative-driven series that has pretty much vanished into thin air, and Sega's really pivoted to just Phantasy Star Online and that side of the franchise, which while it's fun, I feel like that's a completely different beast, targeting a completely different genre. But with all that focus, it leaves the original saga at risk of being forgotten by new generations, and I feel like this is one of those things where I don't think a remake will gain a ton of traction, but it can get a little bit going just to maybe modernize it a little bit. But this is one of the games on the list that I'm like, I doubt we're actually gonna get this ever in our lifetime or the next. Golden Sun really can be considered one of the top 5 turn-based JRPGs on the Game Boy, but it's been in hibernation for way too long and it's screaming, remake me! You play as Isaac, a silent protagonist in a world governed by elemental forces called Xenogears. The story kicks off with the stolen elemental stone in a journey to prevent the return of ancient forces. And it starts very traditional, but eventually it unfolds into something much more morally gray. Now the plot gets even deeper as you progress into some of the sequels, because it flips your perspective, letting you play as the villains to show both sides of the story, similar to something like The Last of Us 2. And I feel like in that time, the narrative was very ambitious, especially being a game on handheld. Now, Golden Sun Dark Dawn was released on the Nintendo DS in 2010, and then the franchise just vanished. And Dark Dawn wasn't bad, but it really didn't have the same emotional or mechanical highs as the original, and it ended on a cliffhanger that was never really resolved, which in my opinion is baffling because it seems like the fans of this franchise want more Golden Sun now more than ever. Chrono Trigger probably takes the cake for the most requested JRPG remake of all time, Chrono Trigger and Xenogears, but I feel like Chrono Trigger is probably going to be the most likely one to happen, and I feel like Chrono Trigger is going to be one of those games that's going to get the Final Fantasy VII Remake treatment with the full-scale revamped modern game. Chrono Trigger really is just the method. It's the blueprint for how to tell a compact, emotional, choice-driven story in a JRPG. From the jump, the story is going to pull you into it, and it isn't just about saving the world, it's also going to be about understanding it across time. I'm sure Square Enix knows that we want this game, and with the recent controversy where everyone thought a remake was leaked in an interview, and Square Enix, I know they saw the buzz that this generated. This remake would just be an instant money printer, and it seems like the easiest choice to make on this list. Obviously, it would have to be done right though, and I feel like remaking a classic like Chrono Trigger comes with the additional added pressure to not ruin the legacy that was already established. While it's been ported to just about every platform under the sun, Chrono Trigger still doesn't have the one thing I feel like it truly deserves: a full-scale Final Fantasy VII Remake-esque modern remake. These are going to be the 10 JRPGs that I feel deserve a remake immediately, but if you check out this video right here, I'm going to go into 10 JRPGs with extremely dark and mature storytelling. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.